Okay, so a little bit of review from last time, and then we'll be into new material. There are three models of the rabbi I introduced you to: the yeshiva rabbi, Miknadik or Misnagdik in Ashkenaz, and the Baal Shem Tov and the Kotzker. So question for you, it's a little bit like Ron's quiz. He has this on his quiz as well. How did the role of rabbi change? What did the role of the rabbi change between the yeshiva model and the Baal Shem Tov model? And which of the three most exemplifies Heschel's place? So let's answer those as a class. And does knowledge lead to wisdom? Does knowing a lot help you guide people in their lives? And is the role of rabbi like, and this would be in a way traditional from the Talmud, which is they're like the head of a legal academy. You know, you go to the dean to find out, what do we do in this situation? And what's the best way to understand this? But Heschel, the Baal Shem Tov's critique is that knowing a lot doesn't necessarily make you wise. And therefore, really what the role of the rabbi is to channel God. You should feel that you're in the presence of someone who's connected to God. And then can they channel God? Can they help you channel God? Can they help you daven? Are they, as Amichai says in the poem, Two Loves, are they the one that help you? They are born of the same location. They know the same trees. They know the same people. So they understand you rather than going off to Vilna or Odessa and studying for 10 years and then returning to tell you how to live your life. So can they help you channel God? Now, you might get the sense from where we're talking about moments of insight, the feeling of absolute dependence. It's a personal experience, a unique feeling of connection to the divine. It is a feeling of awareness of being connected to a greater power, realizing that life's blessings and achievements are not entirely self-made, but are part of a larger divine system. You would think that Heschel would be close to the Baal Shem Tov, meaning, yes, I'm here to help you feel God, channel God, realize where you may be rejecting God, help you develop an awareness that you are not alone and that God is searching for you. And God has a relationship with the Jewish people from this ineffable realm. But based on my experience teaching Heschel for 20 years, the Kotzker basically felt like, are people really going to get that? I mean, the Rebbe feels it, but can a Rebbe, can a rabbi, can someone who feels this, can you really help someone else to feel this? The Kotzker was much more pessimistic. And so I would actually put Heschel right in between these two, because he says he's between those two, that he certainly didn't write something that I can read and say, now I feel connected to God. If anything, you can read him and say, I still don't know what he's talking about. I want you to try question number 3, okay? Here's a shela and a tshuva. A shela is a question that comes to the rabbi, or a question that arises in a certain period that the rabbi needs to answer from Jewish law. So a shela is the question, and so I'm putting you in the role of a question comes before the community. May Jewish corpses be used to train medical students or in body exhibits? If you've ever seen a body exhibit, it's a way of teaching children awareness of the fact that you actually have stuff in there, and you should know what it looks like, and maybe you'll take care of it better. I want you to identify with what it's like for someone like me to teach the next generation of Jews at a place like Beth Israel, and the struggles that I have with trying to teach conservative Judaism. Class of 5th graders would decide for this question. What do you imagine Heschel would say, and how about you? Who wants to go?
Right. At some point, the corpse is going to decay, at which point it has no identity as a corpse. And so it's basically arbitrary. And because sort of like treating somebody on an emergency or giving someone medicine on Yom Kippur, it has a greater purpose. I think Heschel would say, yeah.
Okay, I'm glad. Thank you for the answer. I appreciate it. But it's a real response in the conservative movement. So I'm using a real piece of Jewish law.
I would imagine that they would be inclined to agree that it could be used for instructional purposes in medical school, which is the first part. And I think there would be a lot of conflict about them between guilt and excitement about whether they should use
You know your fifth graders, Merton. I don't, very well done. And what do you think Heschel would say? Did I bring up this question? And it came from left field, but it's really an excellent question. This shela is a halachic shela. In other words, given what we know in Jewish law and Jewish values, how would the conservative movement, let's say, and by the way, the Orthodox too, to some extent, we're not that far away, but let's say the conservative movement, how did we decide this question? And the answer is, this is not a really big debate. This is not one of those, well, this is true and this is true, which many answers in conservative Jewish law allow multiple things to be true. This really isn't one of them. So why? In the Torah, respecting a corpse, and again, Jews, speaking about other Jews, we're not saying what non-Jews have to do. In Jewish law, this is a big part of Leviticus, a big part of the holiness code. And the holiness code basically says that when you have a relative die, you have to bury them. And it is a mitzvah tamet is supreme. You are absolutely obligated to make sure your dead get buried properly, and we have rules around it. And that there's something about that corpse that needs to be respected, whether you want to put it in language like it's the part of, I don't know, it was their home on earth for their soul, and we respect their home. It doesn't matter what explanation you give. There is repeatedly a core principle here in Leviticus about holiness. That body has holiness and needs to be treated as such. Now, if I bring something like that up and I say, so the answer to the Shela in Judaism is this: if your body could be used by research that could really lead to a cure that would save lives, then it's pikuach nefesh, and it applies to the idea of you can violate Yom Kippur to save a life. But if it's really not going to save lives, then the answer is no. That body is holy, it can't be used for that purpose. And so, if you had a particular kind of concussion and they're going to study this kind of concussion at U of M, and that concussion leads to early death, that's a real possibility. But the vast majority of bodies that are donated to science are really experimented on by medical students. Or I threw in the other one, as Martin responded to, about education. Well, how about education? Because then people might learn and take better care of their bodies. They see someone who smoked and they're like, oh, I don't want my lungs to look like that. And the answer in Jewish law is, you are stretching it. No, that's not violating Yom Kippur to save a life. And so you're out of step with Judaism. You can do it. If Meg has this written into her wishes and I'm there, I'll make sure her wishes are fulfilled. But also, if Meg goes out and eats bacon, I'm not going to stop her. But I'm not going to answer the question, is bacon good for Jews? If it keeps them from eating unhealthier foods, then maybe that's saving a life. It's not saving a life. So conservative Jews and Hebrew school kids love using saving a life for absolutely everything because they're intellectual and they don't have life experience. So Heschel would be like, that would be like the yeshiva guy, let's say, or something, who says, I can find a loophole in the law and I'm going to make it, because actually middle schoolers are really ethical and they're good ethical thinkers. They're lousy religious thinkers. And so my problem as a teacher is, how do I get them to understand something that's based in an experience of awe? And it goes back to the thing we said last time, which is holiness versus ethics. They are not the same thing, because holiness is rooted in an experience of awe, or some folks had an experience of their loved ones' dead bodies. And it made its way multiple times into Leviticus. And it generated an absolute command to care for those bodies and to bury them with respect. And you know something? We're not alone. How many peoples on this earth who walk the earth have the same thing, which is, you know what? We stop and we bury our dead. And it takes precedence. And this dead body, I don't even know whose dead body this is. I found it on the way. I don't care if you're Native American or you're from India or you're from China. We find that kind of experience or value held in many different cultures, probably because people had a similar experience. And there's even the case in the Torah of the corpse that's discovered that no one claims, and your obligations to it. So that would be an example where there's a holiness to a body after death. But if you haven't had that experience, it probably doesn't make a lot of sense. And it makes it hard to teach religion. When they tell their parents, I don't believe in God, what do you think their parents say back? And then they say it in their Devar Torah from the Bima on Beth Israel, because I allow them to use their own voice and speak from their heart. I think that's important to respect that. And then I actually usually get parents bragging about their kids. So proud of them, right? I mean, now, and they say, but I like Jewish values and I particularly like ethics, or something like that. They throw in a nod to ethics. Their attitude is, you don't have to believe in God to be a good Jew. That's 95% at least of the answer. Now, I want you to think for a moment, because I'm trying to get this thing about feeling and experience, right? Not based on knowledge, but based on experience of life. What if they told you there is nothing worthwhile in poetry and literature? Would your answer be, that's perfectly fine. In fact, that's great. I'm almost relieved. Just, you can have a great life without reading. Why is it that in Judaism, to me anyway, is my claim, that if you had you're raising a child, you're raising a young person to have a full life. And if they said to you, I don't see anything in reading, or I don't see anything in poetry or literature or fiction, that you might say, you know what? This moment does not define the rest of your life. You may find that someday you fall in love, or someday, you read a poem, something happens that changes your mind about what is possible through art or music or poetry. And yet I don't find much kinship with most Jewish parents at conservative synagogues who don't say, you're young. We don't necessarily form a relationship with God when we're 11. Heschel would say that. Now, you might say, oh no, Heschel's going to say children are closer to God. This is the kind of William Blake's Songs of Innocence Innocence and Experience, very popular in 18th and 19th century Christian theology, is that the child is closer to God because they have wonder. And we don't have wonder anymore because we're sin-laden adults. We have too much experience to have the innocence of youth. I think Heschel's not into that excuse. I think Heschel would say something like, if you've had no moments of insight, if you've had no real experience of something as holy, then, we're trying to train you in the legacy of those moments and values in Judaism. But the idea that you would tell them, you can be a great Jew without believing in God, just like your parents, I don't think is doing them a service. So I had someone in the class who had a conversation with me this week, and they said, can I tell you something? Is this a terrible thing to say? This is someone who loves Heschel, and we've talked about Heschel before together. I say, I feel like I can talk about religion better with my Christian friends than my Jewish friends. I'm not trying to make big cliche statements, but there is something true about the fact that I teach how to connect to God in my 6th and 7th grade class. I do it, as you know, for those who come to services. We talk about what it means to connect to God through nature, what it means to connect to God through redemption, and what it means to connect to God through enlightenment, just like the service proceeds and the Jewish calendar. And I had kids at the end of the year, when they wrote what they liked and didn't like in the class, they talked about how they feel like they're developing an awareness of God. I just decided to talk about it because I'd given up. You know what I mean? In other words, these kids want to talk about it. They don't want to be patted on the back and say, I'm so proud of you for being such a profound atheist. Like, oh my God, you figured out it's all a shell game. I wouldn't say that. I think love is just blah, 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 blah. And be like, oh my God, you figured it out. Because parents brag to me about this. I don't think it's something to brag about. And I think Heschel is giving us an insight here into saying, maybe it's adults also that they don't really have a connection to holiness. and they don't interpret their own spiritual experiences, let's say, as being in the context of a relationship with God that's Jewish. And so Heschel's trying hard to put those together. I told you I spent a lot of time studying Wittgenstein, about 12 years. Wittgenstein basically says almost all philosophical problems are created by the grammar of your sentences.
Okay.
That, so God looks like a noun, so God's a noun. And, it's probably the best title of any theological book ever, was written about 20, 30 years ago. It's called God is a Verb, right? And I forget the rabbi's name, but it's a brilliant title. So like, you get fooled. But I just want to say, like, when kids bring this up with me, it is an opportunity to engage in a conversation, but I would say it's a conversation similar to they don't see anything in music, or that they don't see anything in poetry, or where it's, I want to lead them into thinking, want them to be open to forming a relationship with that which can't be, that is ineffable, and to see certain experiences in their life that will come up, like falling in love. I mean, it's like, to me, it's like them saying, I don't believe in love. And then parents saying, good, I don't like the, going to services either. So we'll go for it, because I know you want to go for it. These are just what I said last time, and you can read it, but the main thing is Friedrich Schleiermacher saying religion is based on, and he calls it a sentiment, because feeling makes it feel like you're just having a feeling. A sentiment can have cognitive content. It can, and that's the issue about mitzvah. Phenomenology is a way of talking about subjective experience, is like real and worthy of talking about. So if I'm trying to talk to, if my doctor says, how you doing lately? And I say, I'm really struggling, with aging, and it's changing me, like it's changing the way I think. And they're like, well, aging is a process that happens in your body. And I can describe the hormones. Heschel's like, I don't want the scientific explanation. I know you can provide scientific, I don't want a causal account. I guess I'm looking for humanity. I'm looking for a discussion. I'm looking for wisdom. And I'm looking for someone who can teach me that. That's phenomenology. Let's talk about the experience, and then the third one is pragmatism, which we'll get to. And I put a definition up there for you to read if you want. And I will explain it more in a little bit. But no, the answer is the reason pikuach nefesh applies is precisely because of holiness. If you can save a person's life through desecrating a body, then you do it. But what happens is, to me, when I'm just ethical and halakhic discussions, everything's pikuach nefesh. Everything becomes pikuach nefesh. When people stretch pikuach nefesh into a kind of lowest common denominator, they forget.
An ethical principle.
Correct. But even if it is, I mean, look, so let's not stretch it too far. A medical student might make a mistake if they're operating, I don't know, on a dummy rather than cutting up a real corpse. They may make a mistake in the future, and it could cost a life. So I'm making the argument. So pikuach nefesh really does apply. But you see what Heschel is trying to say, and again, I'm like the Kotzker. It's very hard to. I can't prove to you I'm right. Is that pikuach nefesh is based on yira. It's based on a true awe of human dignity and life. The value of a single life and how amazing it is. And not desecrating bodies is based on awe. It's based on the holiness of the vessel that the human person wears. So the Jewish law, according to Heschel, it's not really about ethics. Pikuach nefesh is not about ethics. It's about holiness. And it's religious. It's not ethical. Like ethical, I'll try to give you another quick example, which is I used it last time about Lent. So when I had this experience, the first time I had an awe experience of nature, I just had this overwhelming mitzvah command. A human can't own land. Like that's the craziest thing I ever thought in my life, right? Now, from an ethical point of view, I could say, and this is Nadav, let's say, I don't know, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, you can justify ownership of land through ethics. Absolutely. You can say society is based on a social contract. And if all full rational agents in the society decide that it produces the most mutual benefit to agree to carve up the land into ownership plots, then it's ethical because it was agreed upon voluntarily using people's volition and their reason and their autonomy. And so I can use an Enlightenment justification, and Heschel's got a problem with the Enlightenment. He thinks the Enlightenment is harkening back to the yeshiva, right? So I am trying to challenge everybody. I hope I'm trying to make people uncomfortable, which is some of what we accept as beautiful Judaism, Heschel's going to challenge you on. What if halakha is not based on ethics? It's actually based on something else, and it's not ethics. And so, like, and how would we even teach that? You know, how would I even, because you know, the kids love debates, but how can you teach? How can you teach a sense that we don't have a right to own the land? Humans don't have a right to say I own something, and I can pass it on in perpetuity to other humans when there are other people being born and may need to share it. Or I have the right, this happened in California when I was there, which is there was so little water that people like golf courses and clubs and others were digging into the aquifers. And they were draining the aquifers so much that land was actually sinking by a measurable amount. So that land in like my county was sinking by, it was crazy. In 10 years, it sank like 1.5 inches. Like from who says you can put a hole in the ground and drain the aquifer? Like, so anyway, awe is more than an emotion. It's a way of understanding. This is the only problem. Like Schleiermacher always gets nailed for the fact, oh, come on, a feeling like anger or feel. No, it's an experience that sees life through, Ron said it best. You feel like you're connected to a larger vision, and you feel like there's content being communicated. Now, if you actually write down the content, you're not going to be able to tell you're not going to be able to tell the difference between someone faking it and someone for whom it's real. I use the example of when I ask people, why are you going to marry this person? And they're like, I say, are you in love? And what I was trying to say with that is this. One person says, they laugh at all my jokes. They're absolutely beautiful. My family loves them. I don't want to be away from them, right? And I ask the other person, they say the exact same words. And I can tell that one person's in love and one person's not. So the problem Heschel runs into, and I personally think he's right, is this is what's going to make you crazy about philosophy, a religious philosophy, which is you can say the same mitzvot or the same ethical stuff, and for one person it has a basis in holiness, and for the other person it doesn't necessarily have a basis in awe or in holiness. It's just, I don't know, the 10 suggestions or the 10 commandments or the 10 things that we do. It's like, so, you know, and I mentioned about poets. I said, there are poets who walk the walk, like they write a poem about this perspective that changed their life and they're living it. And then I said, when I lived in Manhattan, I got to meet a whole bunch of famous poets and Nobel Prize winners and others. And some of them were just trying to sleep with as many of their students as they could, literally. And I'm like, okay, I don't, that, you know, you can say all the right things in a poem. It doesn't necessarily mean you have a sense of the dignity of, Kierkegaard says this too about the Casanova and the Romeo. It doesn't necessarily mean, so you can't always tell from the words. So if I have a real religious experience and I say, I was in touch with God and it's like this, and Patty says the exact same thing, Patty may not have had the experience, or I may not have had the experience, and Patty did. Like, you can't tell from the words. It's very hard. I mean, so that's why he's saying you put it into words, but it's not just a feeling. But it should, those words should tell you it's a change. It allows you to perceive in the world intimations of the divine, to sense in small things the beginning of infinite significance, to sense the ultimate in the common and the simple. And all of this are things you can imagine go with the word holiness. What's the point? How is Shabbat supposed to affect the rest of your week? You're taking a Judaism 101 exam with Rav Nadav, and Ron Sussman wrote the quiz. How are you supposed, what's the point of Shabbat? And the rest of the week, you bring a little bit of Shabbat in. That's not a bumper sticker. It's not a bumper sticker. It's saying that there's something, a way of cultivating awe or living faith to the moments of awe that generate Shabbat and seeing the eternal in the small. Very Jewish way of doing it. Knowledge is fostered by curiosity. Wisdom is fostered by awe. Just so you know, Yirah is from the root Yod Resh Aleph, to see and to perceive. Awe. So you're perceiving, you're seeing, but you're sensing the, how's he called? the sense of the ineffable. But it's sensing, and seeing in Hebrew can also be seeing with your mind, just like it is in English. There are times in the Torah where seeing means, do you see what I mean? Yud Resh He is the root of Torah, Mora. It's not the same root as Yud Resh Aleph, but the idea that Yerah is kind of hidden in the word Torah to some extent. If you find yourself in agreement with Heschel, or you think it's speaking to you, or you want to see Judaism from that perspective, you realize why every blessing starts with the word Baruch. Baruch is really hard to translate because you either translate as praised are you or blessed are you. And it's complicated because anyone who knows Little Hebrew, I already saw Jim nodding, is Baruch looks like a passive form. It looks like you're blessing God, right? Blessed are you, like I am blessing you, God, which makes no sense because a superior, so what the hell does it mean? Why is it there? And why is it the root of everything? So Heschel would have an answer. As another great thinker says, the word, don't think of Baruch as an unusual grammatical form that you also find in the Torah and you also find on high holy days, which is you find Rachum and Chanun. So Baruch looks like it means like Patuach, the door has been opened. So God, you have considered yourself blessed. Nadav blessed you, God. Consider yourself blessed. That doesn't make any sense. Why am I blessing God? God should be blessing me. But if you don't view it as like Patuach, you view it as like Chanun and Rachum. They mean Rachum is sort of the source of, it's the flow of compassion. It's a compassion that's flowing from God through the universe. Chanun is the flow of graciousness or grace from God. So Baruch is the flow of blessings. But that goes back to the feeling of absolute dependence. You keep saying the word Baruch because you're trying to say it is an attitude of gratitude. It is practicing gratitude. So last time I asked you, can you make a list? Like, could you keep a gratitude journal and would it work? And I thought we had a good discussion. It's not an easy answer. I think Heschel would say is like writing a beautiful poem about love or all the reasons you love somebody, it might help recover the awe that's in there. But if you've never had the real gratitude, it's going to be the empty list that doesn't have the real emotion or feeling behind it. It just becomes and so when you say Baruch, like in the morning, you're saying Baruch, thank God that my pipes flow and I can evacuate. Thank God I can stand. Thank God I can walk. Thank God I can face the day with strength. Thank God I'm walking out the door with the kippah on. I'm crowned in holiness. Thank God I get to walk out today in a Jew. Thank God that I can see the difference between light and dark. So I just want to say this word bracha is intimately connected to yirah because all real gratitude, all real sense of blessing was rooted originally either by you or by the person who wrote the prayer in a real sense of holiness, a real sense of gratitude. You ready for some partner work or from solo work? It's the 10 commandments. And the question for you and your partner, identify a possible moment of insight or awe that generated the commandedness. But you can go down, what's the moment? What was a moment, like I talked about the corpse, like I don't have a right to leave this corpse unburied. Like it's that sense. Like that's the piece of awe, like, oh my God, I've never seen a corpse. I do not have a right to leave that corpse unburied. Or, oh my God, I just lost my mom and this is the last thing I want to do. I need to care for that body. I need to wash it. I need to say blessings over it. I need to do this myself. This is not something I should be assigning. I mean, today we have a Jewish mortuary do it for you, and that's ethical. It's perfectly ethical. It's not the moment that generated that law, right? It wasn't like, make sure the bodies are washed, respect. I'm asking for like what, so can you identify or suggest a moment or an experience where someone said, I don't have a right to do this. I don't have a right. So I understand, but so let's just do murder for a second. I mean, I know that I feel a lot of resistance in the room to Heschel. I'm going to go home, feel like big failure. But what I want to say is like, as I said last time at the beginning, I actually think he's right. I know what he's talking about. I can't convince you of it intellectually, But we're talking about all of there's a reason I thought about this, doing it this way. He doesn't do this. Think of all of those movies. There's so many where there's the scene of the person who's like, murder's no big deal. Forget Crime and Punishment. Let's do a war one or something, an assassin movie, a war movie. And, the kid who went through basic training in Vietnam kills someone and then like just can't get over with, right? And the other soldiers are like, some people can't get over it, or it's a cop show, right? And one of them kills someone in the line of duty and they're like, I practiced for this, I trained for this, and I think I want to quit my job, right? Like this, Heschel's trying to talk about the experience of really understanding the sacredness of a human life. And I personally think Heschel would say, and I would say in 100% agreement, or I think Heschel would agree with me when I say, boy, we sure spend a lot of time in our lives talking about the sacredness of human life. Rabbis talk about it in sermons. People talk about it to their kids. I don't know if, I don't trust that they're not just paying lip service. Do they really understand the dignity of human life? I mean, this goes back to what Schiffer was talking about on some extent, which is, can you kill children in Gaza and still have a sense of human life? I'm not making a political statement. I'm just looking at where is the one that says, I have no right to do this. I didn't create life. This is still religious, right? There's a difference between an aesthetic experience and a blah, 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 a religious experience. Oh my God, I never thought of it this way. Like, I mean, I don't mean me now, the person saying, life. Imagine for a moment, imagine for 10 seconds, the possibility that we are the only sentient life, the ones on Earth. We on Earth are the only sentient life in the entire universe. And it is possible. It is unlike every 6th and 7th grader I have in class who say it's mathematically impossible. Of course, there's other life and all of that. I'm not talking about, I don't know, Parasium or something, or a sand creature. Sentient life. They can't do it. Can you think for a moment? The only life in the entire universe, the only sentient life is on Earth. And it is possible. There's a finite number of galaxies. There is a finite number of stars. It is not infinite. Infinity is a real thing. It doesn't apply to the number of galaxies. It's finite. You start thinking that way, people, they just can't do it. No, I can't do it. Stop it. No, you're wrong. They can't be. I'm like, you can't even enter there because the holiness of life. The holiness of life. The gratitude for getting to be alive. The sense of bracha, the sense of todah, the sense of seeing your life and the lives of others over a wider horizon than life is my hero journey through life. I got a fancy degree. I was valedictorian. I did this. I won my spouse through courtship. I don't think if we're so you don't have to say, it's because there's a supreme being who made life here. Because as soon as you start thinking of God as a noun, as a supreme being, it's not going to be God. God's not a noun in the universe. It's something like the giant ineffable that enfolds our universe, or that it's something that changes your perspective. So that's a kind of person who says, I really realize the dignity of all life, that all life is sacred, not a bunch of liberals who pay a lot of lip service to it. It's not about like, I posted this on Facebook, I'm a good person. It's about like, do you really have a sense of the preciousness of life? I know I talked last week, and I know it's upsetting to some, and I feel bad about that, about people who face death with a certain kind of attitude. Like, do you know, Shehechianu, thank God who gave me life, B'kiyamanu, thank God that gave me a span to live, and V'higianu, a moment to say goodbye. He delivered me to, like, there are people who do that, and other people are like, that's crazy. Anyway, like, how dare you talk about death that way? I'm like, when you realize, like, we don't have to be here. Like, this is an incredible thing that universe produced a life like. Let's just go to remember the Sabbath day. So most Jews will tell me, if I want to spend the Sabbath breaking the rules, I'm going to drive around and I'm going to I feel like painting. It's my only day I get to paint. I know that's creating. And they go through all the things. Rabbi, I hate to tell you, I know I'm going to burst your bubble, but that's the way I do Shabbat. And I think I think that's what God wants me to do. He wants me to spend my day painting and creating and composing and stuff like that. So I didn't really get Shabbat until I had an experience at one point. And I grew up keeping Shabbat. I was blessed to have a fantastic Shabbat life with my dad, my mom, my brothers. Fantastic. So it was all good. I could give lots of sermons about, let me tell you how I grew up with Shabbat. You should raise your kids like this too. It's beautiful. Until I really got the idea that about the worst thing that we do is to enslave another. It's about the worst thing a human being can do to another is to rob them of the control of their time and to rob them of all of their time, like to keep them from having a Sabbath. So the origin of the Sabbath, we didn't get Sabbaths in Egypt. Everyone, including non-Jews, gets a day off. But then on my day off, I want to create. It was a moment, and I won't tell the whole story. I don't even know if I remember the whole story. It was a moment of insight where I realized that I don't have the right to enslave myself. That the whole idea that, Rabbi, the way I spend my Shabbat is up to me. And I know best what it means to have the day off I need. Is I realized, well, let's say gardening, right? Chores outside. It's the only day I get to do my chores, and it's good exercise. That's labor. I don't have a right to deprive myself of a Sabbath, of a day where I don't modify the world. I don't labor. I don't create things that are permanent. You're allowed to create things that dissolve. You can build your sandcastles. I can write songs on my guitar. I just can't record them. I can't write them down. So like you're living in the space, but the sense in which I don't, like God freed us. And the worst thing human being, or it's like, forget the God. The worst thing human beings can do is enslave someone else. But me, my autonomy is more important. I'm allowed to enslave myself. I'm allowed to work on Saturday because I really want to, I have to do my assignment because it's due Monday. And the president of the congregation is expecting my report. And I'm not going to get it done because I know tomorrow I've got a funeral, a bris, and a conversion. So again, goes back to ethics. Ethics is based on autonomy. You using your autonomy, you have the freedom to make your decisions. Do you really have the freedom to deprive yourself of living Shabbat? Do you have the freedom to enslave yourself? I don't think you do. So like it comes from an insight, you don't even have the right to not keep Shabbat, even if you have the freedom not to keep it. And some people, when I say stuff like that, let's say I'm teaching it in a course like this. Some people go like this, I know what you mean. And other people go like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Honor your father and your mother, right? As you probably know in Jewish law, this applies to, halakhically applies in two cases, but the main case I usually talk about, it means that when your parents are elderly and they're old and infirm, you take care of them and you preserve their dignity. So it's basically about taking care of parents in their old age. Some parents are really unpleasant. A significant number of parents are narcissists, emotionally selfish, have not been great to you. There's really no good reason that you say, I should take care of them, right? I should make sure, and I don't mean you have to take care of them in your house. You can put them in assisted living and nursing home. I just mean you take some responsibility over it. There's got to be some insight, moment of awe that went into, that may be true, but I don't have a right to abandon my parents in their old age. It could just be that, you know what, I got stuck with some pretty emotionally immature parents, but took care of me when I was little. They changed my diapers. I got to make sure their diapers are changed. Like you can make logical arguments about it, social contracts, enlightenment thought, quoting from scripture like a good Vilna yeshiva rabbi. But Heschel saying at the base of it was a moment of awe or multiple moments that produced mitzvah, that generated these insights. I'll do one more, which is the coveting. So as you may know, what coveting kind of means, or its example, it's situational ethics. comes from the part of the Torah that says, when someone goes off to war, you cannot covet their wife, because there was men back then, or their belongings. Now that's different than, well, what's the difference with stealing? And why? And how can we make a law against something in your heart? We Jews only have laws against actions, not feelings. The answer rabbis give is like, it's like, imagine a movie about that, or imagine a real situation where you have an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old, they just got married, very custom in Jewish history, and they go off to war. There's their spouse, their wife. She's hanging up the laundry. She's having problems. She's now doing the farming, and she doesn't even know how to use the plow. Think Little House on the Prairie or something. And you're the neighbor. And you're thinking, I could help with that plow. She looks lonely. She probably has no one to talk to, right? By the way, they've got that prize bull. She's not even using it. Someone should put it to use. The idea is that someone had, and this is different than Freud's superego. This is different than you were taught as a kid to have a conscience and the voice comes out of your conscience. This is like a real experience of God, to be like, you know what? If I had no attraction to her and I could care less, I'm going to go plow her field for her, like a good episode of Little House on the Prairie. But if you're attracted to her, I have no right to go over there and flirt. There's no way I'm going to go over there and plow that field or borrow that ox or chat with her without flirting, because I know, like, I know what I'm doing. And so that it's generated, I don't have a right. I'm going to have to talk to someone else about plowing that field. And I'm a weird guy. I told you that last time, because one of the things is that I warn people when I don't understand young people today at all. That's a certainty. But as a rabbinic counselor, one of the things I tell people is, if you're with the wrong person, get single. And the reason is, there are going to be people like me out there that I will not flirt with someone who has, I would not flirt with someone who had a boyfriend. And I didn't have the most active dating life in my life. I've been single most of my life, but I literally had people later in life tell me, I was hoping you'd ask me out. I was like, but you were going out with Steve. And they're like, I know I was going out with Steve. I was hoping you'd ask me out so I could dump Steve. And I was like, you have me wrong. You don't flirt with someone else's partner. That's just not, you got the wrong guy. And it's not because I'm a good mama's boy and mommy told me that and I have a good conscience. It's like something deeper. So the idea that, Meg, you had I appreciate that. I know that we're coming to an end, but since Shavuot's on Sunday, Sunday night, I wanted to answer the question, which is, or address just a piece, and we'll continue next time, of how do you translate individual experiences into a religion or a community experience? And I'll tell you from the reading what Heschel says about the moment of Sinai, which is your moment of awe is, whether you're a convert or born into it, as at some point saying, I'm a Jew. And as a Jew, you inherit, you take on the legacy of our community and tribal experience of God. If you're a Buddhist, you take on the Buddha's experience that sickness and death are the worst, so don't be attached to anything. If you're a Jew, you're a legacy of a people that was enslaved in Egypt and got free. And it will generate what Sinai, or what the Jewish experience is, which is, we had a collective experience of the worst thing that can happen to you, and that cannot happen anymore. And that experience was passed on. The middle. The Bible is not a system of abstract ideas, but a record of happenings in history. Indeed, some of the biblical maxims and principles may be found or could have been conceived elsewhere, without parallel in the world or the events it tells about, and the fact of taking these events as the points where God and man meet. Events, rather than abstractions of the mind, are the basic categories by which the biblical man lives. They are his existence, to his existence what axioms are to measuring and weighing. Man does not steal because of a timeless imperative, but because he was told by God not to steal. The Sabbath, it came out in experience we're talking about. The Sabbath is kept not because of timeless value, because it's good to rest, but because it came out of the sense of mitzvah, that you don't have a right not to. The concept of the philosophers is devised by one thing, but so our attachment is expressed by our way of celebrating these recorded moments of God contacting our ancestors. And we do that through the weekly reading of the Torah rather than by the recital of a creed. That's why we read Torah. To ignore these events and pay attention only to what Israel was taught in these events is like tearing out a piece of flesh from a living body. An aesthetic experience leaves behind the memory of a perception and enjoyment, but a prophetic experience leaves behind the memory of mitzvah, the memory of a commitment, not only of a perception. Revelation was not an act of enjoyment. God spoke and man not only perceived, but also accepted the will of God. Revelation lasts a moment, but the acceptance continues. This then is given to us in Jewish tradition, not an idea of, but a commitment to revelation. Our task is to examine our attitude to that commitment. Is there any meaning to our being loyal to events that happened more than 2,000 years ago? Biblical revelation must be understood as an event, not as a process. What is the difference between process and event? Process happens regularly with a pattern. An event is extraordinary and irregular. Process may be continuous. Events happen intermittently and occasionally. So I want to go back for a moment to explain this, and I'll stop with this slide, which is, as I said last time, faith is faithfulness to your moments of insight. And faith is also, he defines as your moments of insight add up to something. So that this all leads to mitzvah, which leads to emunah. And emunah is a commitment. It's usually translated faith. It's not a faith that God exists. It's a commitment to the mitzvah that came out of the awe. And I'm going to put it really, really simply with Sinai coming up with Shavuot, and it's in the reading. The phenomenology piece. People want to say your experience of subjective experience can be explained scientifically. So he wants to say you can try to explain everything scientifically, but you're missing the point. So what's the experience from 2,000 years ago that is not a pattern? It's not the thing that happens all the time, but it's a moment that you should take seriously. And it's why the life of biblical man is something we read all the time. It's prophetic. And here it is. It's not that the Torah was dictated at Mount Sinai. This is where Heschel is not a fundamentalist thinker, but he's also ain't reform. It says on Mount Sinai that God spoke in kolot, which is translated as thunder. Sure, it's the Hebrew word thunder, kolot. But in rabbinic thinking, the word kol means sound or voice. And then the rabbis say, Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad, which is in Lachadodi, which I'll be teaching at the Tikkun. One set of 10 commandments in Exodus, it says, Zachor, remember Shabbat. And in Deuteronomy, Moses says, God said, keep Shabbat. The rabbis say, at Sinai, each person hears a different voice. God didn't speak with a voice, and Moses was not a stenographer. Even though, crazily, most Orthodox people today tell me that's what happened, even though 30 years ago, most Orthodox people told me that didn't happen. So the idea that there was dictation out of a cloud and Moses was a stenographer has become a mainstay of Orthodox Judaism now. And 25, 30, 40 years ago, it wasn't, which tells me how much Orthodoxy has been influenced by Christianity, by the way, and a commitment to fundamentalism. So you have a group of people. We're not saying there was a voice out of the sky. And Heschel says, this is what prophecy is, and this is what we know. The only thing we know in the world is every country's got its own God. And when you go to war, the gods are fighting each other, and you hope your God overcomes the other God because it's going to help you win the battle. And we also know that for most people, the leader is a representative of God on earth, and they have some kind of divine right to rule. And what we saw is that that produces tyranny. And that produces the worst things human beings can do to another. So this poor little shepherd, Hebrews, animal workers, lowly nomadic people get out of Egypt, and their attitude is, you don't get a king. No kings rule by divine right. Like, you know, a king ain't a god. And not only that, but yeah, you can think of our God as the Jewish God, but the other gods are false gods. Like, there's only one God. There's not like we have a national God, they have a national God. And then this legislation flows. You know what God wants most from you? Look at the people who are disenfranchised. The widow, because she can't own property and she didn't inherit and it passed to the uncle, the fatherless child who has no protexia in the world, the woman who screams out in the field because she's being sexually assaulted and no one can hear her, the immigrant, the runaway slave. And you know what? Everywhere in the world, a runaway slave is required to be extradited. Not with us. Anybody who's runaway slave gets to stay with us. And you know what? They can live in it. They can, and the tribes don't have a right to be like, well, they're not part of the Shimon tribe. They better live with someone else. No tribe can turn them away. They can live with whatever tribal lands they want. And so it's like we're producing a way of being because it came out of an experience and it produced mitzvot and halacha. And Heschel says, so you're going to say, well, they didn't really hear anything, so it's not really God because it didn't come out of the sky, or they just got that from the Babylonians. I mean, how often am I going to try to teach Shabbat? Someone's like, you know, Rabbi, I hate to break it to you, but the Jews got Shabbat from the Babylonians, didn't invent it. You know, so like you're going to get a lot of people who want to explain this away. Heschel's like, that's all I'm saying, is that's what Revelation was. And if you ever have a sense in which, my God, in the grand scheme of the widest horizons I can look at, human history is pretty short. Sentient human history is really short. I was born, or I found myself identifying that I wanted to join the Jewish tribe. And this is the Jewish tribe's experience of God and how to live. It is our prophecy. I don't have a right to be like, but you know, I like playing football on Saturday. And my kid's good at it. Right? Or, you know, so like, we're going to do that instead of like, you start to realize that Judaism is not served on a platter for you to treat as dainties, to be like, I like this and I don't like that. And I can use my really smart brain to tell you why. It's really rooted in identification of why we're here and what it means to be part of something larger, what it really means to serve the Jewish people. And to view that as a purpose. And so I'm going to show you one last thing. And some of you are going to be like, I hate that he ended with this. A moment of awe is supposed to change the way you see the world. So you've probably seen this before. So Jim, tell me one thing this is.
You want the rabbit or the duck?
Oh, you gave me both. Is it a rabbit or is it a duck? The famous duck rabbit. Heschel is saying that moments of awe can change the way you see the world. It's the same world. It's not that God appeared to you at the bush. I mean, think about the bush itself. Moses is like, I'm living the good life as a shepherd out in Arabia or Yemen. I'm good. And then the bush is like, no, you're not. You have no right to leave your people suffering in slavery back in Egypt. And Moses is like, no, I really do. I'm really fine with that. And God's like, no, you're not fine with that. That doesn't have to be God appeared in the bush. That could be Moses being like, it's an experience of, do you have a right to leave your brother behind or your sister behind? So it changes the way you see reality. And then if you're like, well, I want to know what God looks like, God's a being, basically you live with a sense of the ineffable as God, which is that there's no better way to think of the universe as ultimately something we have not encapsulated with our minds that sends us prophetic messages. And life is, if you ever got a prophetic message, you better be faithful to it. And that's why we say amen. Amen's the same root as emunah, which actually comes from the word, we translate it faith or faithfulness. It comes from the word meaning solidly, well-founded. And so it's like, this was well-founded on experience, on real prophetic experience. And my religious life is grounded in moments that I'm going to be faithful to.